So tonight's topic will be, do we need God for morality? We have the affirmative side on my left and the negative side on my right. Now, before I go on, I want to advertise some of our upcoming events. So tomorrow, we have a discussion on Was Hamilton Wrong, which is 5 p.m. Ainsworth GO1. Then week 2, on Monday at 5 p.m. at the Quadrangle GO32, we have Newbies Night together. Then week 3, this exact same place, same time, we have a discussion rather than a debate with everyone, which will be, do we have free will? Then for week 3, we have registrations for the Great Debate, which you can find on our link tree. And then we also have another discussion event, another debate event, which will be 2 professors. Professor Melissa Merritt and Professor Gigi Foster will be debating one another on is morality about rules or results, same time, same place. So, without further ado, I'll announce the format. So first we're going to do a prior vote of your positions on the topic. Then we're going to do 2v2 initial speeches, each of which will be 7 to 10 minutes. And then there will be 5 minutes audience Q&A in between those speeches. Followed by a cross-examination of 7 minutes allowed to each team, and then a general audience Q&A of 10 minutes, followed by a final vote to declare the winner. So, let's do the prior vote. Everyone please close their eyes.
Do we vote?
Okay, please put up your hand if you are unsure that we need God for morality. So you're on neither side. Please put down your hands. All right, now put up your hand if yes, you believe we need God for morality. Please put down your hands. Now put up your hands if you think no, we do not need God for morality. All right, please put down your hands. Okay, so for the initial vote, if I've counted correctly, we've got 9 unsure, 5 say yes, and 21 say no. So it's an uphill battle. Okay. So, without further ado, we'll go to the speeches. Welcome our first affirmative speaker, Jasper.
Wonderful. Well, the question at hand in this debate is whether we need God for morality. But before comment is made in this regard, it is important to clarify what is not being debated here today. We are not arguing if we need God to be moral. That is a separate matter altogether. Rather, it is whether morality is philosophically defensible and tenable, and a tenably existing entity without God. We're also not arguing if God does or does not exist. We are arguing about particular meta-ethical implications that are tenable based on God's existence or lack thereof. Now, when I say meta-ethical, I'm referring to the foundation of ethics. We, myself being a theist and Quinn an atheist, will be arguing that God is indeed needed for a moral system to get off the ground in a meaningful way. The way that we will be demonstrating this is by arguing that any non-theistic model is more, or can be more easily explained by moral anti-realism than is denying that morality exists. So to flesh out such a case, we will we want to have a good understanding of 3 particular concepts that are contained in the question itself. Namely, God, need, and morality. Firstly, we can think of God as a perfect, foundational, and agentic entity. He is perfect in that he can do anything and knows all things. He is foundational in the sense that he is the ground and source of all reality, and in all its varied forms. And God is agentic in that he has intention, will, and action. In short, he does things in an intentional way, though not in a creaturely or anthropomorphic way. Secondly, need. Now, an entity is needed by another simply if there is a dependence or requirement relation. Now, this is relatively straightforward. and non-controversial. Third and finally, and arguably the most important, is what we mean by morality. Now, morality is a normative system that governs actions and desires. What this means is that it establishes things you ought and ought not do and desire. For this to happen, there needs to be what's referred to as a truth maker or truth makers. Now, as the name suggests, truth makers are entities or states of affairs that make propositions true or false. If no valid truth maker is present in this case, then a proposition is false. Truth makers are crucial to this debate. For example, for the proposition, there is a pen on that table. So if we think about that proposition, the truth maker is the state of affairs of underness and overness involving the entities of the pen and the table. And we can say that that proposition is true because there are those specific truth makers. Now, in regard to morality, a truth maker is that which makes a particular action or desire good or bad. Now, for morality to exist, it requires what is referred to as this moral ontology, moral being, moral existence, a moral truth maker, something that can make an action good or bad. Without moral ontology, there is no morality. This is straightforward. If there is nothing that makes an action good or bad, nothing is good or bad. So how do we ground morality effectively? Where do we get our moral truth makers from? Well, theism offers an easy place to anchor and ground our moral ontology and truth makers. Given God's existence, and this is important, given God's existence, we have a being that has the power to ground moral ontology in any number of ways, similar to the way that he grounds physical ontology. Now, he can then also inform creatures like ourselves of said moral principles, indubitably. So God then is a being with the easy capacity to ground moral ontology and then, as I said, indubitably inform us of such a moral system's existence. So this is far from problematic. Where problems do start to arise for moral ontology is when God is taken out of the picture. Where can moral ontology be anchored? Where can our truth makers be found? Why would reality even have moral truth makers at all? Now, the central problem for the negative is understood most clearly in how we choose good and bad theories of explanation. Now, these are what are referred to as the theoretical virtues. The chief among them is explanatory power and explanatory simplicity. Now, to illustrate these virtues, imagine that you have an empty cookie jar and you are babysitting a small toddler. You go over to the cookie jar is empty, and the toddler has crumbs smeared all over its face. Now, you could come up with two theories. The first theory being that aliens broke into your house. They then ate all the cookies and then, to frame the toddler, smeared the crumbs all over the toddler's face. Theory A. Theory B, the toddler ate the cookies out of the cookie jar. Now, both of those theories explain the data to the same extent, but one of them is by far simpler and so should be preferred. Now, clearly, the second theory is to be preferred because of its simplicity. So if there is no God to ground these moral truth makers, then we can just as easily explain our moral experience as an illusion. To do so is theoretically far simpler, as there is a far lower ontological price tag, in the sense that reality is less complex. There's less that we need to explain. In a similar way, a mirage in the desert is an illusion of water. So too can our moral seemings that things are good and bad be explained if there is no God. There can just as easily be explained as our liking and disliking of particular actions. Now, to be clear, these are then descriptive states, not normative states, meaning that there is no moral truth maker and so no morality if there is no God. Now, this is key. Any theory of moral realism without God will be better explained by denying its existence because it will always be theoretically advantageous to do so. Because of this, any non-theistic moral realism will not be able to get off the ground. Thank you very much.
All right, before we go to the next speaker, we've got 5 minutes of questions for Jasper. All right, so any questions?
Could you explain why simplicity should be our measure for why to accept a theory, like one theory over another?
Sure. Well, I mean, this is quite a big question when it comes to meta-philosophy, when it comes to the theoretical virtues and things like that. Though I think we would broadly use these quite easily in the way that we choose different theories from one another. So for example, you can think of any number of metaphysical theories particularly, and as to why we would want to choose simpler ones rather than others, just because we have what's referred to as like a higher ontological price tag. It's going to be more theoretically expensive because if you imagine Occam's razor, that you don't want to multiply entities without necessity. If you don't need an entity to exist to explain something, then don't have the entity in the system. And that's what I was trying to draw out in my analogy with the child and the cookie jar. So that was like an instance every day that we would frequently use simplicity as a measure of good and bad theories. And that carries over to metaphysics as well.
Any other questions? Yep.
Can you explain what's your definition of God? Because when we read Greek stories, there are plenty of gods, and some gods they marry to each other's relative. It's very messy, and they don't really have a morality. So can you define it in pieces or what?
Yes, yeah. So when it comes to my definition of God, I'm operating on a monotheistic definition of God, or some the term that I refer to is a foundational entity. So a lot of the Greek gods and a lot of gods that have pantheons are not kind of these ontological groundings of reality. Let's say they're a part of reality, they don't ground reality. They may cause particular things to happen in reality, but they're not this kind of foundational ontological definition of God.
Examples in history of the religions which...
Yeah, so the big three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam and Christianity, would be really good examples of these conceptions of God being... But there are even, theistic but deistic conceptions of God that are very similar in that regard.
Yes, I think the gentleman...
Yeah, I don't think that that's true of a lot of non-Abrahamic religions. You have concepts like the one in Neoplatonism, and you have concepts like Brahman in Hinduism. There are ontologically sort of grounding concepts in other religions.
Definitely, yeah. They were just three examples. So they were just three. I just said that there were three good examples with the three monotheistic religions. I think that the Neoplatonist conception of the one is really helpful, and that's been used by Islamic and Christian philosophy a lot. So there's a huge amount of overlap between that.
Right, but it originates in Greek polytheism, I guess.
In terms of and that's totally fine.
Yep.
When you talk about God, do you mean just a higher set of morals, a higher definition of morals, or a physical manifestation, a person embodying those? Which one of those are you arguing?
In terms of what kind of morality that I'm arguing for?
When you say God, do you just mean there has to be a higher rules, a set of rules that govern how we act? Or do you mean that it's physically a God that embodies those for us to follow them?
I think that there's none of those in particular that I would say would be necessary for this debate, in the sense that there are multiple ways in which you could ground theistic ethics, whether it's kind of a rules-based, whether it's a virtue-based, whether it's a kind of a teleological base. So rather than, it's more so, I think the point that I'm attempting to drive at is what are our morals grounded in? What are the truth makers of our moral facts? Where do our moral facts get ontology? Where do they get being? Where do they get existence? In a similar way that, we want to say, well, this water bottle exists. Obviously, morals don't exist in the same way that the water bottle exists, but both of them need to exist for us to kind of have that.
I think it was yourself, yeah.
Okay, so I was going to ask about, good and bad. So if you've got a God that inspires good, and you know that it's revealed through text or such, doesn't it necessarily also inspire bad? You've got bad things that occur, and often I hear religious people say that the reason is because over time it will teach us to be better. Something bad happens to us, we learn from it. That accelerates our process. But if you're saying that the good side of that comes from God, doesn't necessarily also the bad side?
Well, because I'm not necessarily arguing, whether we... I think that's perhaps slightly unrelated to the issue, because I would say, in the sense that God is the grounding of all that exists. God is the grounding of moral ontology. And to kind of bring it back to moral ontology, moral existence. I think a few times in my opening statement, I referred to, if we don't have these truth makers, there's nothing that makes something good or bad. And so in that sense, yes, like if there's just no moral ontology, and we need our moral ontology from God, then yes, like we can differentiate between good and bad.
Okay, that's the 5
Yeah.
minutes
Okay.
for this section of Q&A done. So we'll go to the first speaker of the negative team, Ethan.
Thank you, Jasper. Such a good speaker. My teammate Oliver is just handing out some cards just to clear up some of the things I'm going to say. They're not essential, and there's not enough for everyone because I didn't expect so many people. So you might have to share, but those are just going to be helpful points. I'll just give them a minute.
All you guys will share one. It helps you can take a picture of it and pass it to someone else as well.
Good go. All right. Hello. My name is Ethan. I'd like to welcome everyone to this debate, apparently on mustaches versus a clean shave or light stubble. But there is another topic at hand. Do we need God for morality? My teammate Oliver and I say no. First, let's clear something up. There are two main ways of conceptualizing morality: through the anti-realist lens, where for the purposes of this discussion, words such as good and bad simply refer to the preferences one has, or through the realist lens, where good and bad exist independently of anyone's preferences. Now, my teammate and I actually have polar opposite positions when it comes to meta-ethics. I'm an anti-realist, Oliver is a realist. But I would say this internal diversity actually strengthens our side. It means that whichever view you take, anti-realist or realist, we've got a place for you over here in the no camp. I'll now briefly outline the case for anti-realism and argue that under anti-realism we do not need God for morality. If you're somehow not persuaded, then Oliver will show how even realists should favor our position. So I will begin by presenting an argument of my own creation. We can call it the argument from moral anti-realism. It goes like this. Premise 1, moral anti-realism is true. Premise 2, if moral anti-realism is true, we do not need God for morality. And the conclusion, we do not need God for morality. So this is a logically valid argument, meaning the truth of the premises guarantee the truth of the conclusion. Therefore, to deny this argument, the opposing team must deny the first or second premise. Note, however, that the premises are sufficient but not necessary conditions for the conclusion. That means that even if you reject the premises, as my teammate Oliver does, you can still agree with our side. But now, how might I substantiate each premise? Well, let's begin with the first. Moral anti-realism is true. Why accept this view of morality? Because, in the words of Lance Bush, most conceptions of moral realism are either trivial, false, or unintelligible. If by moral realism one merely means that human moral attitudes converge based on some shared psychological, biological, or social principle, then realism is trivial, since this view is perfectly compatible with moral anti-realism. If instead moral realists claim that all rational agents must necessarily condemn some action such as murder, then the claim is false, because a rational being could, in principle, coherently reject moral norms. This conception is essentially making a false claim about other people's preferences, such as everyone's preferences lead them against murder. Finally, moral realists routinely employ terms like reasons, categorical, or irreducible, and when pressed on what these terms mean, they are reliably unable to provide a clear definition, instead insisting that such concepts are primitive, or that us anti-realists secretly know what they mean and are just being difficult. In such cases, I say their view is simply unintelligible. And I contend that a trivial, false, or unintelligible view of morality is untenable. Therefore, moral anti-realism stands as a sole survivor. So, to give you a refresh on anti-realism, around this time last year I stood where I am now, arguing in favor of veganism. I'm vegan, by the way. But what I meant when I say you should be vegan is really something along the lines of, I desire for you to stop needlessly funding the suffering and death of innocent beings. Or, veganism is likely entailed by the preferences you already have. The truth maker for these statements is that I really have these beliefs. But if you're uninitiated, you might say anti-realism seems untenable. Are we to accept that Hitler was good because committing genocide was in accordance with his preferences? Well, not quite. Genocide is presumably against all of our preferences, so we can accept that while it may have been good from his point of view, we can still say we consider it a bad and in fact terrible thing because it goes against our preferences. Now, if you've accepted my first premise that moral anti-realism is true, why would this mean we do not need God for morality? Well, I ask you to consider what morality is, and then based on that understanding, ask whether a God would be necessary for it to exist. Under anti-realism, typically all we mean by morality is our own preferences. And is there a reason to believe we need God to have preferences? Not one I've come across. And I believe the affirmative team would have a very difficult time arguing that we do. Therefore, it seems that the second premise of my argument is also true and thus the conclusion. But I will freely admit there are ways out of premise 2, though they come with problems. They rely on the fact that there are certain anti-realist conceptions of morality that need God, such as divine command theory, the view that God's preferences dictate morality. Now, I'll note that some people would not consider divine command theory to be anti-realist, but for the sake of argument, we can operate under the assumption that it is, since that grants a stronger point to the opposing team. Obviously, we would need God for God's preferences to exist. So the antecedent, anti-realism is true, would remain true, but the consequent, we do not need God for morality, would be false. But while this may be a valid way out of premise 2, it comes with problems. The first is that God's preferences on their own do not say anything about our actions. If you choose to base your actions on God's preferences, that's perfectly fine, but what ultimately explains your behavior is still your own preferences, which do not themselves require God. The other issue is that it waters down what is meant by needing God for morality. Yes, if you just define morality as God, you need God for morality. You need God for God. But this is about as interesting as defining morality as Harry Potter and then saying we need Harry Potter for morality. I don't think this is what the debate proposition is intended to mean. If we're going to say we need God for morality, presumably what we want to say is that, but in some sense, where we can't just substitute God for Harry Potter. So that's the conclusion. Thank you for hearing me speak. Soon enough, Oliver will argue that if you're not convinced by my anti-realism, you should still accept our position. Until then, I look forward to hearing the opposing team reject either the first or second premise of my argument.
So
Thank you.
5 minutes Q&A.
Can you clarify how morality is a preference?
Well, I would say that at least when I say something is wrong, I'm saying that is against my preferences. So I don't take one of the typical 3 moral anti-realist views, error theory, non-cognitivism, or subjectivism. So I can't say what someone else means when they say they think something is wrong, but that is my conception of morality, and it's the one I find most convincing.
How would you argue that that is the case for everybody whenever they're making a moral statement?
I wouldn't.
So what if the rebuttal could just be like, well, that's what you think morality is, but I'm going to argue that it's something.
I think that's okay. I think with a debate proposition like the one we have tonight, it's essentially going to come down to what is actually meant by the word morality. And I don't think any of us would be capable of convincing every single person in this room that by the word morality, you actually mean this. So what I can do is present a conception of morality that I find very convincing, present arguments in favor for it, and that should take people who are persuaded by my conception to accept my conclusion. Oliver has a different conception of morality to me, but we share the same position on the debate proposition.
I still would like you to define your definition of morality, because it seems to me that you are equating the morality with my preferences, because that is definitely something different between morality or what I feel, what I think, or what my preference is.
Yeah, so let me clarify. I did say this in the debate, but my speech is not going to persuade everyone in this room. I'm totally fine with that. It's going to persuade anti-realists or people who are closely aligned with that. But so again, if you disagree that morality is preferences, that is okay. You might be more persuaded by Oliver's position. But yeah, just to provide clarity on that, if I say something is good, I'm essentially saying I prefer that thing. If I say something is bad, I prefer that thing, or I disprefer that thing.
When you mentioned that humans to follow God's preferences would be to preference that themselves, that's, I think, predicated on the fact that the humans have free will in the first place. So I think that's a kind of another assumption you've baked in there, because if the humans don't have free will, then it's still based on God's preferences, and it's not based on kind of individual human preferences.
I'm not quite sure about that. I think what I've said is compatible with both free will and determinism. The case is essentially God may have preferences, right? So if we assume God has preferences, and those preferences are what we mean by morality, all I'm saying is that alone does not determine anything about our actions. Unless we're going to take maybe a very specific theistic determinism view and say God is omnipotent and he's got preferences and he's just going to force us to abide by those preferences. That may be one case in which I suppose God's preferences would say something about our actions. I'd accept that.
So I do understand your definition, but because morality obviously operates objectively, I want to understand if you're proposing whether it's, God's preferences that have shaped the universal definition of by which morality operates on, and if that's become the objective standard that we
well, I think.
And just one more point to that, because I believe that does conflict with your second argument, being that if moral anti-natalism is true, we do not need God for morality. But that's perhaps
you might have to clarify the latter part, but I will say you said morality obviously operates objectively. I guess I would disagree with that. I consider morality to be a subjective thing. Would you mind clarifying the confliction, please?
Oh, yeah. Well, just want to understand, well, first of all, if you do believe that morality did operate objectively, and that the universal definition that we sort of run with to determine how morality operates in society is by God's standard, by God's definition, then that would conflict with your second argument, because in fact we would need God to have morality to exist, because it's His preferences that we are existing from, that we are indulging in morality.
I think I understand what you'd mean. I would just clarify that I don't believe morality operates objectively. I think that resolves the confliction.
Okay, we'll go to the second affirmative speaker now. Quinn.
Alrighty.
All right. I must say I find it kind of strange that, we're all arguing for anti-realism at the moment. I will, as an anti-realist myself, I thank Ethan for providing some of the argumentation.
Before we go on, I just want to check. Who understands the meaning of the terms of moral realism and anti-realism? Actually, who doesn't? No? That's it? Okay, yep.
Yes, but with respect to Ethan's arguments, I will be going at premise 2. And so, although I would like to begin with a clarification of my position with respect to Jasper's, because as an atheist myself, I don't really buy into a lot of the, dare I say, hokey stuff he says about ontology. My apologies, Jasper. However, I think the value that a theistic perspective, like the one that Jasper offers, is that God is essentially the ultimate expert. So, returning to the anti-realist arguments, a lot of the propositions or the way realism is sold, it's true. A lot of them come off as being very trivial, and recalling Jasper's opening statement, they lack explanatory value. However, I would not go as far to say that we have no accounts which are intelligible. Certain people have proposed accounts where morality and the truth makers of morality kind of attach to these moral properties which are associated with certain actions. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but the important thing to take away from is that it's at least in principle possible. Now, with respect to God as the ultimate expert, basically God tells us through written text and perhaps the Pope, depending on who you are, that morality is real. And if we accept what God is, and we accept kind of the, theistic baggage that comes with that, then we are kind of epistemically warranted already in believing in objective morality and moral realism in this way, even though the kind of mysterious background behind what actually cashes all these things out properly is hidden from us. Now, to move on to this question of preferences and the kind of anti-realism kind of redefinition of morality, because that is what it is, right? I think even Ethan admitted it himself, right? Now, I think something important to kind of hold in your mind is that this is ultimately a linguistic argument, so it has to kind of obey the standard arguments that we would expect if we were to make this kind of claim. Now, Ethan argues that his conception of morality will only work for some anti-realists in the crowd, and I think that I mostly agree with that. However, I think we can say a little more, and I would like to propose that in general, the way we talk about morality, there is something left out in that kind of preference-only account. Now, consider a description of this, essentially a state description of somebody and all their preferences. Perhaps take a particular scenario where perhaps someone is thinking about donating to charity, but they decide not to because they want to buy themselves something nice. And we, kind of understand that as being a feature or, a factor of the preferences that they have at the time. Now, what I'm going to need you guys to do is essentially hold that scenario in your brain, right? And think about this person, think about the preferences, think about the scenario, and, accepting Ethan's proposal of realism, right? Or not realism, anti-realism. His proposal of what morality ought to mean, or what means for him, right? Let us say of that action that is moral. So this person has obeyed their preferences, and we say of that, this action is moral. Now, the kind of effect of Ethan's redefinition is that the obeying of one's preferences, or the forwarding of one's preferences, and what is moral is synonymous. So we're essentially saying the same thing. Now, that means in this situation, if we are kind of like viewing the claim, this is moral, as being like something we're asserting that might have informational content, right? Does it make sense when, when holding in our minds all the facts about this situation, the facts about this person's preferences, does it make sense to, in addition to that, say this is moral? Now, I think it does. However, if we accept Ethan's redefinition, and we accept that these, the word moral and the associated concepts are actually synonymous with this this stuff about preferences, then when I say this action is moral, I've actually not added anything. I've not added any informational content. So that as an assertive expression is pointless. Now, personally, when I think about the situation, when I think about this person's preferences, and when I think about the claim that action is moral, there seems to be something additional. It seems to be sensible when I say that that's, even if we don't necessarily accept Ethan's moral perspective on this in particular, it seems like there is an additional claim being made when I say this is moral. And this is why, returning to this truth maker question, Jasper harped on it, and indeed I will as well, is that this gap between the descriptions of the states and these extra claims of morality, there is like a conceptual gap. There is something that's left out. And that conceptual gap, the part of our concept that is not fully covered by state description, is what's required to get moral realism off the ground. So that extra conceptual content has to, has to latch onto something in reality. Just as claims of preference latch onto something in reality, those additional moral conceptual claims also need to latch onto something. Now, this kind of critique, which is, I'm borrowing G.E. Moore's argument in this situation, is not restricted to just Ethan's perspective on preferences, right? This is supposed to be kind of a general argument against this kind of like dialectical move where what we understand our moral expressions to actually mean is being redefined. Now, this is kind of like a distinct move from a more ontological moral realist claim, which is we keep our ordinary moral concepts and we go out into the world and we want to say that these moral concepts actually do attach to these new things. And this is where the simplicity argument comes in. However, the redefinition argument or the linguistic argument is when I take Ethan to be preferring, and we may also see it, I suspect we will see it in Oliver's part of the presentation. So just watch out for that. When you're listening to some of the content that may follow, think about in your mind when we talk about other accounts of morality which just consist of state descriptions, would saying this is moral add informational content. So, and I would allege to you that in most cases it does make sense to say that, and therefore this linguistic argument is kind of dead in the water. Anyway.
All right. It's Q&A. Yeah.
So how exactly would God hypothetically ground morality? Would it be based on what God approves of or something else?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of again, it's good to make a separation between divine command theory, which is a specific system of morality, between how our moral expressions come out as true. So what I'm proposing is essentially one thing you might want to say, and one way God might do this, is that there are essentially metaphysical moral properties which kind of attach in some way to particular actions, and that is kind of the in reality target for our moral concepts. So whether or not those moral properties are present and in what character they're present will kind of like cash out those claims. And the connection to God, beyond the fact that God is, telling us they exist and giving us epistemic warrant to believe that they exist, that, it seems possible that he can make it happen.
So would you say those moral properties can lead to moral axiomatic statements?
Which more?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
What the appeal be, what would the appeal be?
I mean, like,
Does that make sense?
yeah, in the sense that, like, wherever properties are and however they're distributed across reality, we can make some sort of statement.
It's the appeal, because if it's not, like, you're saying God is getting this from somewhere, and just use the spokesperson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, wherever he's getting that from, is that an axiomatic? Like, because it would have to be, right, for it to be.
You're saying like, is that itself the first principle rather than God?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, it's like, it depends. Yeah, I mean, when we think about our moral propositions and what they mean and how they attach or their conceptual content, if axioms are important to that, I don't see why we would kind of rule that out. I guess it depends exactly what you consider the philosophical importance of an axiom to be, because there's a way you can understand like something like the concept of like pleasure is the ultimate good as essentially being a propositional form we use or a proposition we use to describe regularities in reality.
If the axiomatic statements did exist, you would be a moral realist, not anti-natalism, right?
Well, if the properties existed, I would be a realist.
Okay.
Yep.
Could you think of any, like a concrete example to make it clearer, in which, you could say many things about preferences, and then on top you say, this is moral, and that is clearly saying something extra.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to refine the example I offered a little earlier. Consider you have person Jerry who is deciding whether, as I said, to donate some amount of his new paycheck to a charity or to keep it for himself and spend it in however way he wants, right? This as a moral decision, Jerry decides to spend it on himself, and depending on how you feel about morality, say if we're going for a conception that is like preference first, so if I act in accordance with my preferences, then that's kind of like that's what's right.
Okay, so
like you said, you kind of classify morality as each scenario you have like a good or bad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like hypothetically, if you just kind of assign every scenario randomly, good or bad, like completely randomly, wouldn't that provide a grounds for moral realism without needing God? Like, aren't there ways to construct moral realism without theism?
Yeah, like it's technically possible, right? The problem is that just because it's possible does not mean we would ever be epistemically warranted in believing that it's true. So this is kind of like, this goes to the simplicity point where it's like, I can, is it possible that there's like, a giant orb of lead somewhere in the universe that we have no access to, right? Yeah, it seems possible, but do we have any epistemic warrant to believe that it exists? I don't think so. And the problem with any kind of epistemic kind of like convention is that we don't want to flex it in like one particular case where we feel uncomfortable about its implications.
Good last question,
Yeah, so I agree that morality is not just preferences, but I would like to hear you explain why you think it can't be a more complex, linguistic or societally constructed thing, like a particular type of preference or something like that.
Well, sure. I mean, it's
like I think you can come over all the barriers that you presented by just sort of narrowing it and having a more like specific version of morality or conception.
Perhaps, and something we might want to say is that, people can think however they want. However, I think when we're having some sort of conversation about the meaning, the truth of propositions and the meanings of words, I don't think it's enough to just say that, for some people, a specific version would do the trick.
So,
Yeah,
we'll go
sure.
to the next speaker. Final speaker, Oliver Kerr.
All right. I'm starting to think I'm the only cool person up here, to be honest. Oh, are you an objectivist, Jasper?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Me and Jasper. All right. So, good evening, all. I'll be continuing on from my debate partner's speech and arguing that God is not needed for morality. But before all that, I think it's important to re-emphasize what exactly is being argued about here. The opponent should not merely be claiming that God is the best explanation for there being morality, nor that a view of morality with God in the picture is preferable, say, for instance, because it's more theoretically virtuous. What's being argued over is whether the existence of morality requires God. That is, whether God is necessary for there to be such a thing as morality whatsoever. And I think you did give a bit of ground when you said that some atheistic conceptions of, morality are still possible under, and in my opinion, I think that's actually giving a bit of ground away. But we can talk about that later if we want to. Furthermore, for this discussion to be interesting, there has to be something special about morality that, say, doesn't apply to things like Vegemite that makes one require God in order to obtain, but not the other, at least not for the same reasons. If morality requires God, but only because everything requires God, then we've moved beyond the scope of this discussion and morality is no longer special as specified. With that in mind, I'll say my piece. The route I've decided to take is to consider some popular reasons why it might be thought that God is needed for morality and show you why they're misguided. Personally, I think the largest reason people think that God is required for morality is because they believe that morality is objective, and that the only way that could be is that if God exists and laid down the objective moral law. Cards on the table, I don't believe in God. But I do believe that morality is objective. Sorry, Ethan? I don't think God is required for objective morality, and if that's right, then I think that's an important faux feather in our cap. That's a fake feather, by the way. Ever since I've had a sense of what it means for morality to be objective, I found it difficult to comprehend why God would be needed for it to obtain in the first place. All the word objective implies is that morality is stance independent. That is, the truths of morality, like that killing is bad, generosity is good, and that we're required to refrain from eating animal products, hold independently, regardless of how we happen to think about them. They're true independent of our stances towards them. Consider facts about the shape and age of the Earth. These facts hold regardless, no matter our emotional states, no matter our beliefs, and so on. They're unaffected by our stances. That's the key thing to remember. There is also a secondary feature that is worth mentioning, which Jasper also touched upon, but is true of all sorts of plausible conceptions of morality, even non-objective views, at least in my view. That is, that morality is essentially normative. It's necessarily tied with our having reasons to go along with the verdicts of morality. It cannot be the case that it is morally right to rescue a drowning child, but that you have no reason whatsoever to rescue them. Moral facts are not just garden variety facts that we can ignore to our heart's desire. They're relevant to how we are to live our lives. Now that we have a characterization on the table, I hope you'll start to see where my puzzlement begins. Why exactly would God be required for morality to be stance independent? It wouldn't be that all stance-independent facts require God, as that would seem to sap morality of specialness. There are a ton of non-moral stance-independent facts in the world. I've seen some claim that God's only needed on account of moral facts being stance-independent and normative, which, for a reminder, means they're reason-giving. But what would be the reason to believe this? Well, whilst it doesn't exactly respond to that question, one popular line of reasoning that I've come across in the realm of answers to the general question of why God would be needed if ethics were objective is that all laws require lawmakers. Okay? Take something like the law in Australia. Without people creating it, there would be no such thing. And if morality is like the law in this way, then clearly it would need a creator. And who better to create it than God? Hence, if we've got these objective moral laws, then they must have been created by God, or so the thought goes. However, it's simply false that all laws require lawmakers. Take, for instance, eternal laws. Laws which have always been and always will be. Such laws need no creator since they've always been in existence. To say that they were created would be to imply that there was a time in which they did not exist and hence would not be eternal. One could hold, for example, that the objective moral laws are eternal and thus have no need for a creator, even if all other non-eternal laws do. Though I'm also skeptical about non-eternal laws in creators. For example, consider the laws of physics. I think they exist, but I don't think they were created by some entity. In the end, given the sketch of objective morality just presented, I'm still left puzzled as to where God is required. What's so special about morality, or objective morality for that matter, that makes it the case that God is required? It's far from obvious. And I'll share a little bit as to why I think arguments from the best explanation, I'm not sure how welcome they are in this debate. Suppose we did argue that God was the best explanation for the best view of morality. It still allows for alternative views to exist. Like if we said that the best explanation for why there are these giant Easter Island heads on Easter Island is that people in the past created them, it wouldn't necessarily imply that aliens couldn't have done it. Right? And then there's also the whole can of worms about whether God is the best explanation for morality, especially if we think that, say, problem of evil is a problem that has to be accounted for under theism, which an atheistic account doesn't have to account for, and things like that. But otherwise, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to ask, since you agree that morality is objective, where do you think the objective standard comes from? Do you think it comes from when humans decide to work as a society, or do you think it exists even before the concept of law even existed? Where do you think the objective standard comes from?
Yeah. So me personally, I'm more of a person who thinks that moral laws are eternal, and I think to even ask the question of where have they come from is to suppose that there was a time where they didn't exist. So it's there are these things that have always existed. Where did they come from? It's nowhere. They're just there. If that makes sense. But if someone was, say, more of a naturalist when it comes to moral realism, they'd be more it'd be more like laws of gravity, for example. Where did the laws of gravity come from? I'm not too sure, but we know they're there, for example.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, could you give an example of an eternal law? I'm not quite sure what an eternal law is.
Killing is bad.
Is that?
Or maybe if you're more inclined, maybe logical truths, perhaps. There are no true contradictions.
Well, I guess I have two questions about that. So killing is bad, so that would be to classified under being a moral law, right?
Something like that, yeah.
So is it kind of circular to say that morality doesn't have to be contingent on God because it could be eternal laws, but then the example of eternal law is morality? It seems like.
Well, no, it's just an optional view you could hold. which doesn't require a creator. Because even if someone says like, oh, all laws require lawmakers, and we go, well, actually, what about an eternal law? We can just understand that, oh, that's just a law that wouldn't require a creator, because to suppose that it could have come into creation implies that actually there was a bit in time where it didn't obtain. So as opposed to saying, that's true, I'm just saying, you could believe that.
Yeah, I also want to ask about the like logical truths being like a law. Like, couldn't you also take the viewpoint that logical laws, like mathematics, for example, are things which, like, that's the way that things are, rather than it being, you know, a sort of rule? It's just like.
I would sort of say like this, that's sort of equivalent, at least as I'm thinking. If that's all right with you.
Yep. Yep. Yes, sir.
I guess that's kind of under the assumption that eternal laws exist. I guess how would you kind of suppose that to be, like, true?
Separate topic. I mean, like, just how? I'm not sure. Like, it
Well,
would just be
yeah,
like, there are these eternal laws.
No, yeah, I feel like I feel like the fact that you've got the assumption that eternal laws are true seems quite, I guess.
Well, it was just more intended as a counterexample to the claim that all laws require lawmakers. Like, oh, well, what about eternal ones?
Yeah.
They don't need a lawmaker. But even if we didn't say by that line of reasoning, I sort of ended that bit where I said, oh, even if we talk about non-eternal laws, if, say, you don't believe in God, but you believe in, say, the law of physics, law of gravity, insert whatever natural law you want to, you could say, oh, I don't believe that they were created, but I still think they exist. That's.
I think that's still then based on the premise that you don't think those natural laws was created by a god.
Yeah, sure, but that's what I believe.
So do you think they just like randomly spawn?
I just wanted to ask, because you said somewhere in your speech that like objective morality doesn't depend on emotions, but I think morality.
Wait, say that last bit again.
You said it doesn't depend on emotions.
In what?
Emotions.
Oh, I didn't actually say that.
Oh, okay.
Though I would say it's like it's stance independent means it's going to be independent of emotions.
Like, I think it heavily depends on state of minds. So like, if that's true, it's subjective. So because you're saying it's eternal, but then how do you make sense of a moral proposition like inflicting pain on others is wrong?
Yeah, so that's actually a bit of confusion there, and I'm glad you bring it up, because when it comes to like mind independent stuff, it's like so it's like mind. It's a bit tricky because it's not saying that minds can't be relevant to what moral facts could be saying. It's just more like, oh, there are these laws that exist. They exist independently of, say, what I think about them. So it could be the fact that, oh, causing others pain is bad, no matter what I happen to think about the badness of that action. If that makes sense.
What was your example? No one can go. Yep.
So I just have a quick question. So, you know, you said like there's eternal laws, which, like, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming you're going to talk that like an eternal law is like 2 + 2 = 4, yeah?
Something like that, sure.
That's like an eternal law. And then you said that morals are also an example of like eternal laws. Like morals that say that like killing is bad and like generosity.
At the very least, it would be like an example of a view you could hold.
Okay, so
I wasn't arguing for that view. I was just saying, here's a view you could hold.
So like that, I'm just saying, like I said, like if you think X is bad, and that's an example of like a moral law, and that could also be an eternal law, which doesn't need God. But just like I guess like something that I was just thinking about is that like let's say something like generosity and charity, like previously, like in previous eras, you know, like I think I'm not like an expert on this, but I know like with like some like in ancient Greek societies, if you were poor, that was seen as like a curse from God. If you're sick, that's a curse from God. Well, then later on, the morality evolved, and then that made that no, you're not sick actually because you're cursed from God. Maybe you're just sick. You're not poor. Maybe you just had because you're cursed by God. Maybe it was just bad situations, and so that's like moral laws. You said was eternal, but that's obviously something that changed around a little bit. So
I guess the way I'd answer that is people can be wrong about morality.
Okay.
So if they were say say we asked someone in the past, what do you think about slavery? And they're like, it's great.
Yeah.
I'd be like, you're just wrong, as opposed to it was good, now it's bad. If that makes sense.
Okay.
And with that, we're going to go to the cross-examination period. So what's going to happen for this part is we're going to have 7 minutes per side, and the only ones asking questions will be the affirmative and then the negative. So we'll start with the affirmative.
Jasper, Quinn.
Take that up.
Okay. My first question is for you, Oliver.
Yes.
Because you talked very helpfully about stance-independent truths. An example being, the circumference of the Earth.
Yep.
And that having quite solid and tangible truth makers, like the truth maker for the proposition.
Oh, not a perfect analogy, I must stress.
Yeah. But you are saying that morality is stance-independent, correct?
Yes. But not in exactly the same way. Like you can't go out and touch.
Of course. Yeah,
killing's bad or something.
Definitely. So, what is the truth maker for moral truth?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends what sort of meta-ethical view you want to land on. Personally, I'd be more of a bit of jargon here for you, a bit of a non-naturalist, which just says, moral facts, they're not natural facts. But then there are some moral realists who think that, the moral facts are just a subset of natural facts. So I guess to answer your question, it'd be like, if I'm a naturalist, it'd be some form of natural facts out there in the world.
Yeah, and
like maybe facts about suffering or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you're more like me, I'd be tempted to say maybe it's more like abstract facts.
Okay, so like abstract objects.
Something like that.
Okay, so moral facts would be abstract objects that exist.
Something like that, at least in my own view. But then you've also got the naturalists.
Yes. Yeah. Would they exist in like propositional form?
Maybe. I'm not too sure myself.
Okay, because I think that these are quite important things to figure out how they actually operate to get a substantive truth maker.
Sure.
So like the example that you used was, it's wrong to kill.
Yep.
For example. So would that be like just a proposition that exists abstractly?
Yeah, it's going to come down to like which normative ethic view is correct. Because like, for example, if utilitarianism is true, there'd just be one fact. Like suffering bad or whatever. And then you get all the particular facts like, kicking Kevin in the head was bad because of course. So, it sort of depends like what are the fundamental moral facts. I'd say those exist as propositions, as abstract facts. And then you get the particulars.
Okay, and so this is before reality existed. These moral facts existed.
If we can make sense of the idea that before,
sure,
sure,
sans reality, like without.
In my own view, but then again, you've also got the naturalists who say, no, they're in our universe. They wouldn't have existed beforehand, but now they do.
Yeah,
and stuff like that. Though I think that's also like a downside on their view, because I think if I think about things like torture being bad, I'm like, that's always been true, right? Like if someone can't say, there was at some point where torture it was perfectly fine or totally permissible, I'm like, that doesn't sound correct.
Yeah.
But
wonderful.
Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. Sorry.
Can I ask Ethan a question then, hand it, or would you like to ask?
I guess I'd like to follow up on that. I mean,
sure.
It's you talk about the natural and non-natural conceptions of and it's true that they exist. Although I think the ability of these to actually, I guess, address the arguments we've been putting forward is, I'm certainly skeptical of this. Like, at least for the naturalist views, they inevitably fall prey to the linguistic critiques. And with respect to these like extra.
What's the question? You need question.
Oh yeah, how does how are these accounts you're proposing? How do we get epistemic warrant to believe them?
Is it like how do we get moral knowledge if either of those are correct?
No, I mean, what reason would we ever have to believe them?
That they exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Like why?
Isn't that a separate subject? We're asking whether or not God's required from morality. Like, these are possible views we could hold. Because if we're also being like, by the way, why should I believe naturalism or non-naturalism? That's sort of a separate subject. But my own sort of quick answer to that is we got to look at the moral datum, which is just a fancy way of saying, we got to take our moral experiences and best explain them, right? And I think those theories can do it justice. But maybe not naturalism if it can't account for the normativity. That's the only reason I might not be inclined to call myself a naturalist. But I'm not sure how much else I can really say without divulging further into deeper waters.
Yeah. Well, I guess my only concern with that is, I guess it goes to the question of when we say that God is necessary for objective morality. I don't think it is entirely unplausible to view as part of that to get objective morality requires us to have, conceivably have epistemic license to believe in the claims of objective morality. That's hardly a tangent to me.
I'm just not really biting into what we're getting at here. It's like why I believe anti-realism sort of thing. It's like, well, that's sort of a... obviously you went into it because that was actually more of a central theme of your argument.
Well, we're happy for you to go deeper. We want to
So I'm not really buying, I'm not understanding what you're trying to get at.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Like, I guess...
phrase it in a bit that makes sense to me?
I'm not exactly sure what, where the miscommunication is. Like, when you say, why believe anti-realism? I mean, that seems, totally relevant to the question with respect to, like, if we view the, if we view as a component of the debate, right, when we say that God is necessary for objective morality, that, there's kind of like a practice or a, if we, or like a kind of like activity that goes into believing what in the claims of objective morality and integrating it into one's worldview. In this sense, the questions of whether we should prefer anti-realism or whether we are ever epistemically justified in believing in the claims of moral realism, that seems like totally relevant.
Here's maybe a helpful question to get us on track here. What difference would God make to this discussion?
Right, well...
So, okay, God exists...
Other cross-examination. Maybe, Justin, did you have any more questions?
It's just more to understand what he was getting at.
I had one question for Ethan. So, is moral anti-realism the view that denies the existence of morality?
No. So there was a degree to which we were talking past one another. There's three main kinds of moral anti-realist views. Non-cognitivism, the view that moral propositions are not truth-apt. Error theory, the view that moral propositions are false, which seems to be closer to what you guys are arguing. And subjectivism, essentially view that, there's a conjunction of three statements, but essentially like it comes down to preferences. Subjectivism is closest to what I'm arguing. So would you mind just restating your question?
Yeah, so it is moral anti-realism, just wanting to rephrase anti-realism, meaning against reality. Is moral anti-realism a denial of the existence of morality, or perhaps the morality of morals?
No, so I think that's what we were talking past one another.
Yeah.
In your speech, that was the terminology you used, but in my speech, I just mean essentially the view that morality comes down to preferences.
Okay. We'll go in the cross-examination from the negative side.
Yeah, I think the main sort of thing I was sort of interested in talking about was like the stuff about the best explanation, most theoretically virtuous, those sorts of things. When it comes to this sort of discussion, why would you say that, it's abductive arguments are the best way to go, I would say, which is arguments from the best explanation, as opposed to say, by the way, this is why we can't have morality under God.
Yeah, and
it's more of like blanket statement.
I think, because I do want to be quite precise here, because I'm not just making an abductive argument. So I'm not just saying that God's existence is the best explanation, simpliciter, like full stop. I'm saying that God's existence is the best explanation, and the other views, if you deny God's existence, the best view possible is to then, on any kind of way that you cash it out, is some anti-realist view. So, for example, your view, which is almost a form of like moral Platonism.
Something like that, maybe.
Yeah, some form of moral Platonism. So what one would much more easily be able to argue is that I could say that a far better theory, if you deny God's existence, is to hold let's say, a stronger anti-realist view. Because I can explain the moral data that you're attempting to explain much easier by just saying that they are an illusory. And so that's more so what I'm getting at. Because you're saying, well, I'm wanting to appeal to these kind of Platonic abstract objects that exist to explain morality. But it's far more theoretically virtuous to just deny the existence of morality. And so, it's a double-pronged thing. So theism is the best explanation for morals, and if you remove God from the equation, the best theory by far is a strong moral anti-realism, where you go, well, it's just, there's no moral ontology, there's no moral truth makers, because it explains the data that you've put forward in the same way.
But it also fails to account for morality. That's my loss.
Well, no, I think
right?
it perfectly accounts for morality.
It's like, it just rejects it as opposed to accommodates the idea that, it is real. So I guess I'm having trouble thinking of why go down this route in the first place. And then there's also like the question of, what makes something the best explanation in the first place? I think with your alien example, sorry, was it an alien? No, it was,
it was cookies.
Yes, the cookies.
Yeah.
I think, because simplicity is one thing, but then there's also like, does it correspond with our other existing beliefs? And our current existing beliefs might be aliens aren't on planet Earth, or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
There are some other criteria too, but I don't think they come into this sort of discussion. Yeah. But for example, if someone, say, doesn't believe in God, then that wouldn't jive with the rest of their beliefs. So maybe God, in that case, wouldn't be the best explanation, if that makes sense. And then there's also like, whether or not, say, someone accepts the problem of evil or not, and that might sort of work against God being the best explanation. Then there's also like Euthyphro dilemma and maybe some sort of associated arguments as well like that. It was like, okay, say God did create morality. He's like, okay, is it good because he says it's good, or is it good independent of him? Or maybe some other special view in between that might suffer problems as well. Yeah. So obviously, like, there's a lot of stuff to say here.
Yeah.
So I guess it really comes down to, whether God is the best explanation. But even if we say, if we tabled that for a second, we could still say, there's still other alternative views on the table that could work, even if it's, say, not the most theoretically virtuous, if we went down that line, which obviously I would also reject too. Yeah. But
is there a question?
Otherwise, back and forth.
Yeah.
I guess to use up the rest of our time, I guess we could consider talking about what we were talking about when it comes to what is the existence of God change here with your question before? So, what warrants our belief in this view or that view? And I thought the helpful way to sort of understand what you might be getting at is just to say, what difference would God existing make here for you? So, say God exists, why would it be theoretically virtuous, or why would it be epistemically justifiable to believe one view now as opposed to before? Is it because like God plays a role in injecting knowledge into our brains or something like that?
Yeah, and well, I mean, the idea is that, before, from a theoretical perspective, anti-realism is preferable. But when we introduce God, kind of like part of the baggage that comes with the concept of, particular gods, like the Christian God, is that stuff for like, God's not a deceiver, that God, has provided us with texts that, give us greater insight into reality than we could ordinarily gain. So it's, as I said, it's like God is like the ultimate expert. It's like, it's like if you go into a mechanic and there's something wrong with your car, even if you have no car knowledge and you have no understanding of these things, you go to the mechanic and the mechanic says, this is what's wrong with your car, this exists, and you have to kind of take their word for it. In a similar way, there's mysterious parts about how realism is supposed to work, and how we're supposed to get epistemic warrant for these like extra ontological objects.
I think I know what you're getting at now. It's more like a worry about like moral knowledge, perhaps. But I think it might not be as an impressive a view, but I guess one could technically hold a view that reality is objective or exists, but we can't know about it, for example.
I mean, it's possible, but it's like all sorts of things are possible in philosophy, right?
But
there's like all sorts of.
It could be the grounding of all ethics. Like that's a possible.
My other worry is like, why doesn't this bleed out to every other knowledge base ever, which makes morality not special anymore? Maybe I could buy it if it's like a non-natural view because we've got these abstract facts that aren't causally related to us. But when it comes to a naturalist, they'll be like, what? It's just like every other natural fact, bro.
Well,
I think Ethan wants to say something.
Yeah, well, I would just add on to that if the critique of Oliver's position is that it doesn't seem like we could know what the moral facts are, how even if God existed, how would we know what the moral facts are?
That's true as well.
Is that a question?
Yeah, that's a question.
Yeah, because like it's. I guess that
religion, those sorts.
Yeah, it just doesn't fully encapsulate what we're arguing. It's not about moral knowledge. It's about
It's
being.
just that your critique of Oliver seems to imply to yourself. If it's just that it doesn't seem like we can know what the moral facts are. But if I've misunderstood, please clarify.
Yeah. I mean, it's true that it may be true that we would have problems epistemically accessing these like extra ontological objects. But of greatest concern is not how would we know and flesh out the particular prescriptions. It's more like why would we ever be justified in believing that they exist? Like what extra explanatory value do they provide to our worldview?
Okay, with that, we'll now have 10 minutes of the Q&A from the audience, then the final vote. Yeah.
For the affirmative, I think. Under theism, the data seems to be fairly similar, except now we have a being that created the universe, and perhaps this being approves of some things and disapproves of other things. From that, couldn't we apply the same arguments that we use for anti-realism under atheism to say the more virtuous explanation is that these moral facts don't exist?
Yeah, and well, I guess that's, I would say one would be obliged to. The difference is that, like, just as with my lack of mechanical knowledge, I wouldn't be like able to epistemically access the facts about what's wrong with my car. However, when I talk to the mechanic, they can give me extra insight. When you think about God as being an expert, and God says that moral claims exist, we kind of like, I hate to say get it for free, but it's it kind of circumvents the explanatory process in a way.
Could I clarify?
Oh yeah, sure.
Could I just clarify your point? So, are you talking about how, like, the argument with the explanatory virtues and simpler theories, if you apply the logic to theism, you can kind of get rid of theism?
Well, under theism, you'd get rid of objective moral truths. Yeah. With the same argument.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the differences between Quinn and I. So, Quinn doesn't believe that God exists, and because he thinks that it actually does fulfill those theoretical virtues much better than I do. So that's the difference between the two of us.
I mean, conditional on theism, you could argue that moral truths don't exist.
As in, like, if theism's true, it would be simpler.
Yeah, to say that moral facts don't exist.
Yeah, well, it's the ontological price tag is much lower than on like a non-theistic view. So for a non-theistic view, you need to say that there's this kind of new set of abstract truths that exist, that just have always existed, to take kind of Oliver's.
I'm happy to grant that anti-realism is true under atheism as well. But how are we justifying its truth under theism, though?
As in, like, moral facts?
Yeah, like a conditional on theism, isn't there still this, like, a price tag on accepting that there are moral truths anyway?
Where I would perhaps then want to push back. So if we assume that theism's true, and that, I mean, if we kind of go like the monotheistic religions, it then kind of doesn't really work well in terms of explaining the monotheistic religions if morality doesn't exist. So I think that there is a huge part of that. Then we do actually have these huge explanatory problems, because then we go, well, why is God giving moral dictates, and why is God doing these things? Because like theism compared to deism. But
might go to the next. Yeah.
For the negative side, when asked for like an example of an kind of moral law, you said killing is bad. Did I mishear you, or is that the law? Is it killing is bad, or injustice by killing is bad?
It could be something like that. It was just an example.
Oh, okay.
So if you wanted to be like, oh, what's the most fundamental moral law? I'd be like, I can't tell you because I don't know myself, right?
Okay.
Because it's like, oh, which normative view is correct? But what was your question?
But like, you would be sure they exist.
Sure. Like, are you saying, like, do I believe the view? It's like, well, yeah, I do believe the view.
Any concrete example of an eternal moral law you give me?
We make concrete.
Like just an example. So when you say killing is bad,
I guess I'm curious, where is this leading exactly?
Right, for the law to be eternal, like, right? It would have to apply across time, and it would have to be true in every case.
Or like, because then we're talking about like absolutism versus like pro tanto wrongs. So pro tanto is like, oh, it's generally wrong always, as opposed to you can never do it ever.
Okay.
So like say lying's bad. It's like, but in some cases it's fine, even if there's say something regrettable about doing it. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Next question.
I think you're arguing that like you don't need God to create truths, but you need to provide stability, and that's kind of what you're talking about with like knowing moral laws. Like you can arbitrarily make some rules, but you need like a physical being to implement them and make people believe in them. Is that kind of like what you were saying before?
Not really. I mean, it's more like it's just the when we want to well, it's a bit of a trivial claim, but when we want to go out and investigate the world, we want to have we want to be epistemically justified. We want to have reasons to believe things that the things that we do, and the argument is just that with God we get some extra reasons to believe in some extra things. And without God, we lack these reasons, and we going by the kind of like conventions that are germane to as something like explanation, we are obliged to take an anti-realist position. So,
Could I add something?
Just for the negative, this is kind of like on this position. I think you're asking that if a internal law to exist that can't be like contradicted, there can't be like counterexamples to it. But with the moral laws, like you can't kill, for example, it still can happen. People still can kill things. But with the laws of math or the laws of physics, if we find that they're false or not, we find out that they're not true, there's something more fundamental underlying that. We just had a bad understanding of it. So when you take these moral laws, is it that we are just given them all and we know they're true for free, or are we maybe we have a clouded view of it, we don't fully understand or fully know everything that there is? So
well, I'm not sure how much you get for free, like across the board. It's like, how do I believe that like you exist? So do I just get to do it because I want to? Like presumably not. Maybe there might be some story about some sort of physical sort of data when it comes to like my experiences and other things like that. But I have to trust that, say, my vision's not just being an illusion and things like that. But when it comes to like, say, just talking moral knowledge, like I think we can be wrong about various things. So it's like, yeah, we never maybe truly get to the whole 100% thing, but I still think we can still know various things. But I think that's true for basically every other realm of knowledge as well.
My question's for the affirmative. I guess I'm not really sure if you provided a good reason for why, for example, someone can't decide this person is the most moral person, and therefore they come up with a set of rules or actions that they follow, and then other humans follow those actions. I'm not sure why, if the premise of, I guess, the debate and whatnot is about why you need God for morals, a case like that can't happen. I feel like you've only kind of made the argument that God is the most kind of realistic way to get kind of a semblance of society that looks like that. I haven't felt like I've heard an argument why that's the only, I guess, kind of way that would happen.
Sure, it's a good question. But I think one of the things that we were talking about is that we do think that, to some extent, to summarize the argument, that we think that God is the only kind of epistemically tenable view to have a truth maker for morality. So, for example, like the alternate story that you gave, that someone could be really good and be like, hey, everyone, these are the moral precepts, go for it. And then everyone's like, cool, okay, this is what morality is. Someone could, I'm sure that there have been people in history that have done that, but then it would be a question, well, is that a warranted view to see that as, it's possible. Like in a similar way that I could say, my hand actually is the grounding for all moral truths, somehow. Like, that's a possible view, but it's a bit like it's not tenable. It's not overly sensible. Whereas, and I think the point that we're trying to make is that theism grounds the truth makers for moral facts really well, and we don't have to do something like, well, they just exist, full stop. Like, we actually have a way of explaining why they exist, how they're grounded. And so if you remove that grounding, all you're kind of left with is either saying, well, they just exist, or that they exist in perhaps a diminished, more subjective way.
So you need lawmakers to create truths about reality, is that what you're saying? Or it's easiest to explain truths if they have a lawmaker?
I wouldn't necessarily use the word lawmaker. It's more like, I think that lawmakers perhaps a bit too precise. Like I'm being a bit more general in just that there needs to be something that makes it true.
Yeah, so I think if you stipulate God, you've got the same number of things that don't have lawmakers. Because before you had reality, which had no lawmakers. Now you've got reality, which has got a lawmaker, but you've got something else which doesn't have a lawmaker, and that's God.
Yes, but the whole point of proposing God is to have that buck stop. So that would almost be like saying, well, who beat the person that came first in the race? There has to be someone that beat the person that came first, because there was someone that beat the person that came second, and there was someone that beat the person that came third. So therefore, there has to be someone that beat the person that came first in the race. And so a big part of proposing God as a philosophical theory, and one of the reasons why I think God is a very good philosophical theory, and I think that everyone else may disagree, is that I think that it explains so many of these.
I can't remember if you've given an example, but can you show that other kinds of truths generally also need lawmakers to make this a relevant kind of question?
When you mean lawmaker, do you mean truth maker?
Truth maker, yeah.
Sure, yeah, so like the example that I gave was that there is a pen on this table. That's a proposition, there's a pen on this table. The truth maker, that there is a pen on this table, is kind of...
The fact that understand the world, like the...
Yeah, there's a fact in the world, pen, table, there's a kind of a principle of underness, overness, so you can kind of explain. And so you go, well, that's why the proposition is truth apt, because there's a thing that makes it truth apt. And so that would be an example. And I think that for anything that's true, there has to be something that makes it true. You can't have something that's true or false, and there's nothing that makes it true or false. Yeah.
Okay, with that, we can finish the Q&A. What if I get you suggesting we've got a bit of time? We might do 1 minute closing statement each side. So just 1 minute. Alright, you ready? You can be less than that anyway. Just a summary of your case before they vote. Do you want to begin?
Say your piece. All right, so my 1 minute closing statement. The argument that we've put forward is that do we need God for morality? Yes, because God is pretty much the only tenable view where you can get solid, foundational truth makers for moral facts. If you do not have moral truth makers, you don't have moral facts. And there are a bunch of other possible theories that you can put out, like, my hand is the kind of ontological foundation of all morality, or that they just kind of exist, and they've just always existed. You can establish those as possible theories, but they're not very tenable theories. And that is essentially the argument that we've put forward. God also has a bunch of other added benefits when it comes to morality. Quinn has talked a lot about these kinds of, God is an epistemic moral expert. Like, you also have that above and beyond problems that other views also have. But yeah, so that's our view.
Yep, and the negative side.
Well, I would just implore the audience to think about what morality is. And I mean, seriously, think of the word good, think of the word bad. Can you provide a definition? Because I can. In accordance with my preferences, out of accordance with my preferences. So consider what morality is. Based on that understanding, ask whether a God would be necessary for it to exist. If you have anything to add, go.
Yeah, I think when it comes to just the view we've been espousing, I think it's not only talking about whether it's possible, but whether it's plausible as well. Because I think with the hand analogy, it's like saying, the truth maker for there's a pen on the table is my hand. Well, clearly not. But if we say take a naturalist or non-naturalist view, we're referring to things out there that could plausibly be truth makers for moral claims, like actual propositions that say certain things are bad or certain things are good, etc. And I think when it comes to the moral expert arguments, it's not clear how their view does any better than ours if it is indeed a problem, because obviously we have to first pick the right scripture, we have to pick the right interpretation, we have to figure out a bunch of things and still rely on our own faculties in the end. And I think that is what's going to basically say that we have the best view here.
Okay, so without further ado, that concludes our debate for tonight. Could I get everyone to, go ahead.
final vote to decide the winner. So could we get everyone to close their eyes? Now put up your hand if you are unsure if we need God for morality. Please put down your hands. Please put up your hand if you believe, yes, we do need God for morality. Please put down your hands. And now please put up your hand if you think, no, we do not need God for morality. Alright, please put down your hands. Okay? So the unsure increased from 9 to 11. The no vote went from 21 to 23. And the yes vote went from 5 to 9, which means the yes side, the affirmative side, are the winners for tonight. Well done. Right, so our next event will be tomorrow night at a different location. There'll be a discussion with the group, as will next week, exact same location as here. Thank you for your time.